servos, petrol stations, roadhouses or convenience stores. No matter what people call them, there are nearly 7,000 conveniently located around Australia for the local communities, the travellers, truckies, frontline heroes such as our doctors and nurses, the Macca's kids and our own frontline heroes manning the retail stores to shop local, buy local, your local, my local, at a time convenient to them.
Hi, I'm Amy from UCBTV. Today we're here with M.McKenzie, Chairman of COSBOA and CEO of ACAPMA, for a Q&A session about the JobKeeper Program. Mark has his finger on the pulse with close contacts with government through ACAPMA and COSBOA. We thought we would open this up to include all retailers, not just UCB members. Why? Because the local cafe, the local restaurant, the local travel agent are all in the same boat and need accurate information. All of them are customers too. The more small businesses we can help, the more we will make the retail sector's survival and recovery from the COVID-19 just that little bit easier. It's a flow-on effect. We all need to be well informed, and we will do our best to make sure we bring you as much useful information from as many industry leaders as we can. We are all in this together is a phrase many use, but we are hoping more people start to practice it. It cannot be every man for himself. Good morning, Mark. Thanks for joining us. Tell us a bit about COSBOA and ACAPMA.
Okay, well, COSBOA is a peak business group whose sole purpose is to represent the interests of small business. But it doesn't actually have small businesses as its members. It has the industry associations that represent small businesses as its owners. So you've got people like the Pharmacy Guild that represent chemists, the Master Grocers Association that represent independent supermarkets. You've got the Meat Industry Council that represent the butchers, the Australian Hairdressing Council and ACAPMA. And effectively the 33 organisations represent their specific industries, and what we do is we come together to caucus issues that are of importance to small business, and then we champion those issues into government. ACAPMA is an employer body, so I suppose the best way to think about ACAPMA is it's the organisation that represents businesses, so it's almost like the union for businesses that operate in the fuel supply chain. The best way to think of it is if you think about the refinery gate, the fuel supply chain, we represent all the businesses in the supply chain from refinery gate, so the trucks that haul the fuel, the wholesalers that will then sell the fuel onto agricultural enterprise, transport enterprise, mining enterprise, right through to the service stations like the ones we're sitting on today. And so we represent those businesses on industrial and employment matters. And within the COSBOA framework, we effectively represent the servos and the small businesses that operate in your local town centres. So it's really important to think about how the two come together. ACAPMA's got a role under federal industrial relations law, but it does a lot of other things too. So we educate service station businesses and transport businesses. We represent them in industrial relations matters. We provide advice and training. And then as the industry body that represents service stations, we participate in COSBOA. My role, I'm the CEO of ACAPMA, and I'm actually also the chairman of the board of the Council of Small Business Organisations of Australia.
What do we need to know about JobKeeper Program? What is it?
Okay, so the JobKeeper is a government program that's really designed to do two things. It's designed to keep people connected with their businesses, and particularly for those businesses that are undergoing significant stress. And by stress, we're talking about businesses that have either had to close or they're suffering a significant downturn in their revenues as a result of COVID-19. But the second thing it's designed to do is to actually make sure that money is in the economy when the economy recovers from the health crisis. So the easiest way I describe it is if you think about water behind a dam wall. So when you're in times of drought, what you do is you allow the water to build behind the dam wall and you slow the dam to a trickle. And in our circumstance, that's very similar to we've got a health crisis and we've locked everyone in the house. So the economy is operating at a very low ebb. So the idea here is that the government is continuing to provide people money so that households have money, so that when we come out of the other end of the crisis, people have got money to spend back in their businesses, and therefore it's almost akin to opening the floodgates again, and then people are able to spend in their businesses and those businesses get a shot in the arm. They recover in the short term. So that's the way the concept actually works. From a business perspective though, there's two really important things to note. So there is a piece of legislation called the Treasury Bill, which actually defines how businesses apply for JobKeeper, what rules they have in terms of being eligible, and what they need to do in terms of managing that process. And there's also a change to the Fair Work Act, which is the industrial instrument that allows me to direct changes to my employees in a fair way to actually make sure that I can manage their expectations and manage their workload in the face of the business operating at a lower level. So those two elements combine the JobKeeper package, which is a $130 billion program that the Commonwealth Government has introduced to help our economy survive the COVID-19 crisis.
Which businesses will be eligible?
Okay, so all businesses, particularly proprietary limited businesses, but it also goes to trusts and partnerships, which we'll talk about in a moment, all those businesses that have suffered a drop in revenue are eligible, subject to the degree to which they've suffered a fall in revenue. So for businesses that earn less than $1 billion, and the vast majority of those are in our industry, if they've had a 30% fall in revenue on a month-to-month basis, they are eligible to participate in the JobKeeper program. And for businesses over $1 billion, it's a 50% fall in revenue. Now I should stress here that the ATO has very specific rules, but it also has some discretion in terms of applying that. So the rule of thumb effectively is I look at my March or my April period this year and compare it with my March or my April period next year. And if there is a 30% fall, then I'm potentially eligible, I'm eligible to apply under the ATO rules. Ultimately, the ATO will actually make that determination. And the businesses need to have been trading for 12 months, obviously, because I've got to compare this time now with the same period last year. The really important point to note though, it's you don't have to have suffered the fall now. If you think that you're likely to suffer a 30% fall in April or May or June, the really big message is apply now. Register yourself with the ATO because they'll provide you with information over time and they'll be watching your GST revenue, and as soon as you trip the 30% fall, you become eligible for payment under the JobKeeper program.
What about sole traders, trusts and partnerships?
Yeah, so sole traders that actually have employees are eligible in the same way as normal companies. But sole traders where it's just one person or you've got a trust or a partnership, if those businesses have had a 30% fall in revenue, because there's very few that are over $1 billion there, then one person, one of the principals there is able to apply for a 30% change that actually gives them the $1,500 per fortnight JobKeeper subsidy.
What about new businesses that were not open a year ago? How will they show they have suffered a reduction?
Right, so there's some real discretion here for the Australian Taxation Office. They can receive information from a business that, let's just say I've been trading for 10 months and my typical trading over that 10-month period has been at a certain level. Let's just say for argument's sake it's $1 million. And then in the past month, their last month's trading was $650,000. They can provide evidence to the Taxation Office on the basis of their trading that actually gives them an indication that they've suffered a fall, and the Tax Office will actually consider that. So I think the big message here is even if you've been a business that's only been there for less than 12 months, you should register for the ATO. Similarly, the other question I keep getting asked is, what if I bought another service station or I've expanded my business over that time? Once again, you're in a position here where you can provide an explanation to the Tax Office that says, well, I had 3 service stations, I bought a 4th in October, but if I take that service station out and I look at the revenue for these first 3 service stations, it's lower, 30% lower than it was this time last year, and once again the Taxation Office has discretion there to actually include you in the scheme. So the big message here is register yourself with the ATO for the JobKeeper subsidy, which is done just by Googling JobKeeper and ATO, and then from then on in you're included in the communications and all the rules will be explained to you through that process.
How do I register for the program?
So the easiest way to register is just go to the ATO website, www.ato.gov.au, and look for JobKeeper. Or if you're really not at that point, just Google ATO JobKeeper subsidy and it comes straight up. Just click on the link. There's a link down the bottom of the page, 3 really simple questions to actually answer. So it's not, a 15-page application. There's 3 simple questions about who you are, who the business is, what the ABN is. So once you've registered, the ATO has your details and they will keep sending you emails telling you what you need to do to continue to be eligible for the subsidy.
What if I did not have a 30% downturn in March, but I do in April or May?
So this works on a rolling basis. So you register now for the period from March, the 30th of March, through to the end of September. So you may be in a situation that in March or April your revenue isn't below the 30% threshold. But by registering, the ATO will be watching your GST, which is a measure of what your revenue is. And if you get to a point at any time between the 30th of March and the 27th of September where your revenue has fallen in a given month by 30%, they will know that you're eligible and those payments will actually flow through. So in this process, once again, once you've registered, the ATO will be in constant contact with you around how you actually administer and apply for the scheme so that your staff receive the JobKeeper subsidy.
What do I have to do once I have registered?
Okay, so once you've registered, you wait for further communications from the ATO, and we expect them to come pretty quickly. So by registering, you've given them an email address. They will then reach out to you with that email address. As far as your business goes, you pay your staff the normal way you pay them. So you don't increase their pay yet, but basically you wait for the ATO to have a chat with you about your eligibility. And they'll be working through hundreds of thousands of businesses basically in the next 2 weeks probably, where information will actually come out to you. So you run your business in the normal way, obviously trying to manage in the face of a significant downturn and look for the emails to come through. The other thing to do is keep an eye on the ACAPMA updates that actually come out, because each day we'll be giving you an update on what rules are changing, what's actually happening in relation to the JobKeeper. But the central information is going to come from the ATO, and so as a business owner, that's what you need to wait for.
Does this mean new casuals, juniors and student visa holders are not eligible?
So if you've got a casual who's worked less than 12 months, and I'm not talking on the fringe, so if you've got someone that's 10 or 12 days off, there's some discretion there. But generally students, so those under 16 years of age and visa holders are not eligible for this subsidy. In a lot of instances though, the JobKeeper program becomes relevant for them. So that's the complementary program. We all know it as the dole payment or the New Start payment. That has actually been doubled over the last month, and effectively now the eligibility there for a lot of people will mean that people who are in that space will actually be able to access the JobKeeper payment if they're not working. Obviously if they're working, then it's just business as usual.
How will I know if my employee is getting the JobKeeper payment from another business?
Okay, so the JobKeeper payment is effectively under the control of the employer. So what will actually happen through this process is once I qualify, and the ATO actually says that my business qualifies, I will have to nominate my staff. Each staff member will need to fill out a nomination form that will be provided by the ATO, which will be a legal declaration that they will be taking the JobKeeper subsidy from this business and they will not be taking it from any other business. Now this is really important for the employee because they're making a legal declaration here. Our general rule of thumb is if you're claiming the tax-free threshold, so if you've got 2 jobs, typically what you do is you claim the tax-free threshold from one of your employers, usually a primary employer. That's generally the one that should be applying for the JobKeeper subsidy for you in that circumstance. But I stress here, you can only claim it once from one business. There are pretty severe rules for people who are making false claims and try to claim the JobKeeper from 2 businesses.
Do I need to pay staff or do I wait to receive the JobKeeper payment?
Okay, so effectively you need to show as a business that you have actually paid your staff. But there's a very important clarification here. You should not be paying your staff the increase. So if you've got a casual that's only earning $800 a fortnight, they're now going to be eligible for $1,500 a fortnight. You pay the normal $800, until you have got approval from the ATO that says your business and your staff are eligible for JobKeeper. From that point on, you need to make sure they're being paid a minimum of $1,500 per fortnight. So that means a staff member that normally might be only getting $800 a fortnight, you will need to lift their salary and pay them $1,500 a fortnight, and you will need to pay that prior to getting the JobKeeper subsidy.
I'm struggling with cash flow. How will I pay my staff while I wait for the JobKeeper payment to come through?
Okay, so we get this question quite often, but effectively what I'd be saying to you is if you really don't have the cash reserves to meet the increase, and for a lot of people in our industry, they've got a lot of casuals that are below $1,500, so this perversely actually increases their payroll, you talk to your bank. So we've been working with the Australian Bankers Association, both as COSBOA and ACAPMA, and there are very easy, streamlined mechanisms that your bank has available to you to just increase your line of credit or your business cash flow or whatever mechanism you're using to actually meet the first payment. After that, it's repaid in arrears. So you've really only got to find the first month, and then after that, you just keep carrying that forward. But really the key point here is you need to pay it in advance. So you have to show evidence of paying your employees $1,500 a fortnight for the 2 fortnights of a month. And if you're struggling to do that, have a chat with your banks, because the Banking Association are telling us that this is something that they understand or be working with businesses that are in a difficult situation to be able to help them with those funding arrangements.
When I get the payments, what will I have to do?
Okay, so when you get the payment, the full amount has to be paid to the employee. Now, in this situation, you think about it as long as you have paid them in advance, effectively that's money that you keep inside the business ready for the next JobKeeper payment. So your issue here is to make sure that when you get the payment, that every employee that was on your book for the month for which you received the JobKeeper payment continue to be paid a minimum of $1,500 per fortnight. So your issue, it really as a business, is to ensure that you keep that money for your cash flow, because effectively you'll have paid out, let's just say, the April payroll. You can now use that money to pay out the May payroll. Then you'll get another payment in June to then pay out the June payroll, and so on. That will keep running through until the end of September. But as a business, you must show evidence that everybody who's entitled to the JobKeeper payment is being paid a minimum of $1,500 a fortnight.
Do I need to tell the staff that I am receiving the JobKeeper payment?
You absolutely do. So there's 2 declarations that have to be made. And once again, these are documents that the ATO will actually provide. So you need to register with the ATO, you need to tell your staff that you are applying for the JobKeeper package, and you need them to fill a nomination form that is then filed back. It's the declaration we talked about earlier that says, I understand that my business will be applying for the JobKeeper for me. And that's just about keeping us all honest. So it's about making sure that the employee knows that the business is claiming the JobKeeper package, and therefore they are legally entitled to that payment. And from an employer perspective, it makes sure that the employee is not actually claiming that JobKeeper payment from another business. And both of those are required to ensure the integrity of this system, because we have to remember that we as taxpayers are funding the entire approach. So the government has to make sure that it's put some rules around the system to make sure everyone's making a legal declaration, that employees get their minimum $1,500, and that the business is actually passing them through to the employees each time they get that payment.
What if an employee is working and was paid more than $1,500 a fortnight? What do I need to do to them?
Okay, so if they've been working, they continue to work, and their normal pay is more than $1,500 a fortnight, you must pay their normal pay. And in this circumstance, what happens is the JobKeeper is paid to you as a subsidy for that pay. So let's just say they get $2,000 a fortnight. You must continue to pay them the $2,000 a fortnight, and the government will return $1,500 back to you for that employee if you're a business that qualifies for the JobKeeper program. In that circumstance too, it's really important to make sure that you continue to pay super on their normal wage. So if I'm above $1,500, the business has to top up to their normal wage. If the employee is below $1,500, then you need to bring them up to the $1,500, but the government will obviously repay that back to you at the end of the month.
What if the employee is working and was paid less than $1,500 a fortnight? What do I need to do then?
So once you are approved for the JobKeeper subsidy and you filled out all the nomination forms, that employee's salary must be brought up to a minimum of $1,500 per fortnight. And obviously that's a gross pay, so you take tax out in the normal way of that pay. But if they're 16 years or over and they qualify, they're an Australian citizen, they've worked with the business for more than 12 months as a casual, or they're permanent and part-time with the business, then effectively you need to bring their salary up to a minimum of $1,500 per fortnight.
Do I need to pay superannuation on the JobKeeper top-up amounts?
So you pay superannuation on their normal pay. You do not, and you're not legally required to pay it on the higher amount. So if I have a staff member whose normal salary is $1,000, I'll actually be $1,000 a fortnight. I'll be paying super on their normal process, and I need to continue to do that. But because their salary is going up to $1,500 a fortnight, I am not required to pay super on that $500 increase per fortnight. I do have the option as a business, but I'm not legally required to do that.
Do I really need to top up staff who are only working for a few hours a week?
Absolutely. There's no discretion here. So we go back to what we talked about at the start, that the secondary goal of this, apart from making sure that businesses can survive and keep their employees connected, is to also make sure that money is in the economy so that when we come out of this crisis, we open the floodgates and money goes into the economy. And so effectively the government has actually said the minimum pay that businesses that qualify for JobKeeper should be paying their employees who are eligible is a minimum of $1,500 a fortnight. So even if they've only worked 3 hours a fortnight, their pay goes up to $1,500. I've jokingly said, because there's a lot of high school students and so on who might have got $100 or $200 a fortnight working a servo, maybe it's a time for the parents to actually up their board because they're going to get the $1,500 a fortnight.
What if my staff don't want to come back to work? Do they still get the JobKeeper payment?
Okay, so this is a really important issue. The Fair Work law, the industrial laws and Australian employment law have not been suspended. So if you have someone who actually refuses to come to work, then you need to go through a process of actually clarifying that refusal. And in that circumstance, if the business finds that they're just refusing to come to work, then the business has the option, or not the option, it has the obligation of reporting to the ATO that that employee is no longer working with the business, and therefore a JobKeeper subsidy will not be paid to them. Now there's a certain series of rules that you need to go through to make sure that you do that in the normal way. And I'd actually say, particularly if there's a service station business or if you're a pharmacy, talk to your local industry association. In service stations it's ACAPMA, about what you need to do in that area. But it applies the same way if we were not having a COVID crisis. If someone refuses to work, you as a business have a right to terminate their employment. And you do that though on the basis of making sure that there's a clear understanding that that's what you're actually doing.
What if I make a mistake and end up with more JobKeeper payments than I am entitled to?
Yeah, so I suppose this is always the thing, we're talking about the ATO and for businesses that's probably the one regulator that we're pretty wary of. But the ATO have clearly said, and in fact it's been reinforced by the Federal Treasurer and the Prime Minister, if we make an honest mistake, then effectively the ATO will not penalise you for an honest mistake. They'll come to some arrangement for you to repay the excess, much like we do in the way of not being able to pay a business tax bill in a given year. You can come to an arrangement to structure payments. You will not be fined for an honest mistake. And there'll be some rules that the ATO will give, particularly if I'm starting to say, well, I expect my revenue in May is actually going to be down and therefore I take the JobKeeper on that payment. Let's just say, you might end up at being only 29% down rather than 30% down in terms of the minimum. The ATO will work with you around that in a very cooperative way. But I do stress that it's honest mistakes. So if people are deliberately found to be defrauding the system, then effectively the normal criminal sanctions that apply in terms of false declarations will continue to apply. So there's no change in law, but the ATO accepts this is pretty difficult for everybody. It's been done very fast. And so they said, if you make an honest mistake, just let us know and we'll work with you to fix it.
Will the amount my business receives in JobKeeper payments be counted as business revenue?
No, and that's a really important point. So while I suppose I've come out very definitively, but the way this has actually been done is it is a subsidy paid back to the business for wages. It's not revenue. Now we're still waiting for a final clarification on that element, and that's something that will come out in the ATO a guidance that all businesses will actually get. But our understanding at this stage is it will not be counted as income to the business.
Will the amount my business receives in JobKeeper payments be counted as payroll for payroll tax and workers' compensation?
Yeah, so this is one of the tricky elements of what's actually happened. So we talked before that effectively, if I've got a lot of casuals who are earning less than $1,500 a fortnight, I'm now paying them $1,500 a fortnight. It's lifting my payroll. And in some industries we're hearing that that's lifting the total payroll for businesses by an average of 40%. That has implications for your payroll tax liability and your superannuation, your workers' compensation liability. Now those two areas are areas that both COSBOA and ACAPMA independently are pursuing with state and territory governments because they are state and territory laws. Workers' comp applies in each state separately and payroll tax applies in each state separately. And a number of them have announced concessions already in relation to waiving payroll tax or deferring payments. But what we are actually advocating for is that these payments do not change your workers' comp and your payroll tax. But it's important to know at the moment we don't know the answer to that question. That is an agenda that we're working on with all state and territory governments at the moment.
What are my options to change the work location or hours in store, or to stand down staff?
Okay, so when we talked about the JobKeeper subsidy, I mentioned there was a Treasury bill that dealt with the finance and the tax issues and how the payment operates. And the second one was a small change to the Fair Work Act. A business now has the right to reasonably direct someone to actually change their hours. Now that could be for a business that's preparing to close, to reduce someone's hours to zero, which effectively is stand down. Still employed with the business, but I'm in a position now where they have no hours. I can direct them to do that. I can also direct them to do a different task in my business that is still relevant to the nature of the business. So a lot of restaurants at the moment are taking their wait staff and getting them to do deliveries rather than, or answer the telephone rather than do wait activities. In that area, I am allowed under the legislation to direct them to actually undertake that difference in work or to reduce their hours. But the process has to be documented. I have to give them a minimum of 3 days notice from the time I first talked to you about I'm going to change your hours. I need to liaise with you and then go through a process of making sure you understand what the new role is or the reduced hours that you're actually operating in. And as a business, I need to do that in a prescribed format. So we will be shortly receiving forms from the Fair Work Ombudsman that will actually be used by businesses to document that process, and then the notification that needs to be given to staff. But what it basically means is have a chat to your staff under those circumstances and make sure you document the two conversations, and they must be given a minimum of 72 hours notice.
What do I have to pay a staff member who is stood down?
Okay, so if a staff member is actually stood down, what it means is they're not working in the business. The employment contract is still alive. So it's like me taking your employment contract, putting it on ice for a period and coming back to it later on. So they're not working any hours, which means you do not have to pay them for any time. But when you receive the JobKeeper payment, that payment needs to be paid through to them because that's something you'll claim as a business. So you pay that in arrears, effectively, of receipt from the business. So as soon as you receive that payment as a business, you need to push that payment through to those staff that are stood down.
What do I need to do if I want to change the work location or hours?
Okay, so in those circumstances, I need to document that process. And this has always existed. So in those sorts of circumstances, what you do is you sit down with the employee and say, this is my situation as a business. I'm actually looking to change your hours down. So I might be reducing you from 18 hours down to 12 hours a day. Or I might want to change the sort of task you move. So I move you from being on a console operator to maybe working on the forecourt in terms of being a driveway attendant. In those circumstances, I sit and talk to the staff member about what it is I intend to do. We document that process, and ideally what you're getting is mutual agreement from the employee, but under the Act they cannot unreasonably refuse a direction to change hours or to change work task. And then you document that at the end of the process. As we talked about earlier, I need to give a minimum of 72 hours notice from the time I have that conversation with them about what I want to do before I actually do it. And I need to document both the conversation in terms of what I'm asking them to do, be it reduced hours or do something different. And I then need to actually document the time at which that occurs. And so all that process just needs to be put in writing. Now, I'm not saying you need to actually write a book about it. Often this is just an exchange of emails that say, look, we sat and had a conversation this morning at 10 o'clock about, in fact, I had to reduce your hours to 12 hours a day from 18 because effectively my business is under hardship. Do you understand that process? Hopefully they'll respond with an okay. And as I said before, under the new laws that have been passed for JobKeeper, solely for this period, solely for the period of COVID-19, they cannot refuse the reduction in hours.
If I issue a direction, does the employee have to follow it?
As long as that direction is reasonable and linked to the reasonable activities of the business, the answer is yes.
How do I know if I am a national system employer?
Well, the first answer is as long as you're not in WA. So in Western Australia, they have a system where a lot of the employers there run under the state-based award. And so a number of those employers will not be eligible for the JobKeeper subsidy. It depends on the type of business that they've actually got. So I'd say in WA, if there's some confusion there, talk to your local industry body because it will depend upon the type of business you are. But for all other states and territories in the country, they are operating as a national employer.
Now tell me about the latest on roadhouses. We know we have had police in Queensland walk in and close them thinking they are doing the right thing, but truckies need roadhouses to get food, showers and rest from the vast number of roadhouses strategically located around Australia. And a big shout out to the truckies out there that see this. We thank you.
Yeah, this has been a really difficult one, and almost to the point that we as a national employer body actually partnered with the Transport Workers Union, so it's like the yin and the yang being combined, to actually seek a clarification from government on roadhouses. So the TWU very interested in making sure that the truckies are safe, and from our perspective making sure that the roadhouses and the service stations had clear direction. The confusion was created when the federal government effectively directed restaurants to close, restaurants and cafes. And so there was an interpretation there that that actually included roadhouses, which had dining facilities inside service stations. But the central problem here was a lot of roadhouses are effectively the lunchroom for truckies. They're required under federal law to take a break away from the truck. So they can't simply walk in, get a takeaway and then go and sit inside their truck. That's counted as work time, and therefore they were really stuck in terms of what do they do? You know, do they get it and then drive down the road? And they were not being well supported, and also at a time when they're doing a lot more deliveries. So we were hearing from the supermarkets that there was a lot more food and grocery moving, so the heavy vehicle industry was kept fairly busy. After a bit of lobbying, on the 24th of March, the National Cabinet changed the law to clarify, to say, well, we're going to exempt roadhouses, but they need to maintain the social distancing. So effectively what that means in most roadhouses is you really have to take out half your tables and chairs and make sure that people are sitting at least 1.5 metres apart through that process. And that was actually communicated out. But the problem with the National Cabinet is it's not a true cabinet. Right? So normally what happens with a cabinet is they can actually make a determination and it's put into law. But because this comprises the national government and the first premiers or chief ministers in each state and territory, they then had to go back to their home state or territory and change the laws. And so what we got was they all did it at different rates, they all did it in different ways, and for the last 8 days we've just had incredible confusion between the police and the industry about whether I can actually operate a roadhouse. The really good news is that as of 8 o'clock last night, that is Holy Thursday, we got to a situation that the last state actually passed the laws that allow roadhouses to operate. So 8 o'clock last night, Queensland got through the legislation that will now allow you to allow truckies to dine in a roadhouse, provided you maintain the social distancing requirements, and that's been communicated to all state and territory police forces. So look, it's been a frustrating issue, I suppose, not just for us, but every roadhouse operator, and particularly for the truckies that are actually operating. But we have clarity now, and I expect that that issue will be resolved from here on in.
Now, if my employee gets COVID-19, will it be considered a work injury for workers' compensation?
Now, this is a really tricky question because it actually depends upon how you prove it. So if I have an employee that actually got COVID-19 and they were the only employee in the workspace, then the chances are they probably contracted it elsewhere. But if I've had an employee that's come into the workplace, got COVID-19, we've detected it, and then I've got other employees that have got COVID-19, the chances are they got it in the workplace. So the simple issue here is if you're in that situation where you have an employee that actually has COVID-19, you need to talk to WorkCover or your insurer about your coverage, because it will depend upon whether it is obvious that they got it from the workplace versus got it from their family or someone else. But a rough rule of thumb is if you've had an employee that's got COVID-19 and other employees have got it, there's a pretty good chance they got it in the workplace, and therefore would be covered by workers' comp in that circumstance.
Should I be keeping my older staff away from work?
I suppose it really depends upon talking to your older staff. So they have rights just like every other staff member. So it'd be a case of sitting down to them and say, well, what would they prefer to do? If you're a business, obviously, that's got advantage with JobKeeper, you have the capacity to reduce their hours to zero and for them to receive the JobKeeper payment. So that's a great thing for businesses that actually have eligibility for the JobKeeper payment. But for others, it's really a case of working with your employees. Ideally, I mean, if you've got people in there that are over 70, that's actually the high risk group, or people who have respiratory illnesses or other health ailments that may make them vulnerable. I think the key message here is talk to your staff. Just get their sense of whether they feel vulnerable in the face of this and whether they actually want to change their work pattern. And what you can do in those circumstances is to make mutually agreeable arrangements. So even if you're not a business that qualifies for JobKeeper, you can come to an arrangement where you just suspend their employment. I mean, in that circumstance, you've got no easy way of paying them unless you do that yourself, because you won't get the JobKeeper subsidy. But for businesses that do qualify, you can actually reduce their hours to zero, they can stay in a safe place, and they will get the JobKeeper subsidy.
If a casual employee calls in sick with or without symptoms, what am I supposed to do?
Okay, so effectively if they call in sick and it's unpaid leave, typically because casuals are unpaid, then you just honour that process for the life of the certificate, if a certificate is presented, or you stay in touch with them in terms of a refusal to do a particular shift. I think the circumstance in this area is you really need to treat this with a little bit of care, and it's important to stay in touch with the casual or the employee and making sure that they're actually seeking medical assistance in circumstances where it may be something to do with COVID-19, or if there's another ailment that's prescribed, it's the same way you normally treat sick leave. If you feel though that employee is just calling in sick constantly, particularly for a casual, and effectively it amounts to shifts and there is no leave certificate being provided, so no evidence of talking to a professional, then you need to have a conversation with them about whether they are actually refusing to work, and then you revert back to the issues that we were talking about earlier. There is a risk in this process, particularly for casuals who are receiving the JobKeeper subsidy, that they might just be sick all the time. The business has the right to investigate that issue, and that's when you should be talking to your employment body about what it is you can and can't do. But I think the key thing here is to actually make sure that if they're sick, you have to treat it as being genuinely sick, and ensure that they are actually getting in touch with their medical professionals and providing a doctor's certificate wherever possible.
What do I legally have to provide for my staff in terms of PPE? Do I have to give them mask or hand sanitizer?
Yeah, this is a really tricky one because you've got so much running around. I mean, one of the myths we had earlier on is that petrol pumps actually cause COVID-19, and we were able to debunk that. But I suppose the key issue here is, as an employer, your absolute obligation is to make sure that you keep a safe workplace. So I would be saying, while there's no legal absolute requirement to provide masks and sanitiser and so on, there's almost a moral obligation to be doing that. So it's really a case of what can you reasonably do as a business. Most of the personal protective equipment at the moment is actually being concentrated into the medical health professionals and the emergency health professionals. We've got a national shortage that everyone actually understands. So if a business is actually not able to reasonably access that information, then they're doing everything they reasonably can as long as they're trying to do that process. Things like sanitiser and actually making sure that you're regularly wiping down benches, fridges, coffee machines, any area that customers come into contact, even front doors, petrol pumps and so on. Businesses should be implementing sanitisation and hygiene practices at the moment inside every area where the general members of the public are coming into contact with equipment, because that surface to human transaction is just as important as the person-to-person contamination. So while you're not legally required to provide gloves and PPE and sanitiser, it is a practice where we would strongly encourage businesses to take advantage of that. But if you're in a position that you can't reasonably acquire things like gloves and masks, as many businesses can't at the moment, that's not a ground for saying you've got an unsafe workplace and for people refusing to work.
Should I be limiting the numbers of customers in my store?
It's always a good idea if you can actually do that, and I think we're in the midst of the process at the moment, so what you generally should be trying to do is to minimise the number of people that are in close confines. You should absolutely be ensuring that they're maintaining the 1.5 metre distance, and we've got a number of sites, whether they be a pharmacy or a service station or a small grocer, who have now got markers on the floor, and it's amazing to see the way that the community is actually adapting to that and using those figures. So really it depends upon how big your store is and what distance you actually have between customers and between staff. The basic requirement is to make sure that people are 1.5 metres apart, and if you cannot do that because you've got too many people in the store, then you need to be limiting access into your store.
Should I stop filling reusable cups or mugs?
It's a good idea to stop doing that at the moment, so that's a precaution. We talk about surface to human transmission. So I think if you've got reusable cups and mugs and someone's actually coming in insisting that they actually use it, you should probably try and sanitise that by having a wipe or sanitiser around there, or if you are using that and handling that cup, to make sure, just as you do with cash, that you're actually using sanitiser after handling each reusable cup and handing it back to the customers. But ideally what you should be saying to your customers is we prefer to actually give you a single-use cup as opposed to using reusable containers.
So my business is thinking of starting a driveway service. What should I consider?
Okay, so in driveway service, I suppose the first thing you've actually got to consider is to make sure you can actually afford it, because the people who are on the service station forecourt have to be paid at the same rate as the console operator. So there's no opportunity to discount their rate. They're paid at the same rate as a console operator. So that's the first thing to actually consider. And the second thing is to actually make sure that those staff members are equipped as best as possible with things like sanitiser, if you can get it gloves, if you can get it masks, that they're maintaining a safe distance away from customers that are actually coming into the service station forecourt. So the same social distancing applies, the same hygiene rules actually apply, and most importantly, the same pay as a console operator applies to all those staff members.
Are there training or induction resources available for driveway attendants?
Yes, there are, and I suppose they just relate to general safety on the forecourt. So the same thing would apply if you've got a staff member that's actually going out to do dips and so on. But ACAPMA's training course has two modules, one in relation to forecourt safety, which is what we call Module 6, and there's another one, Module 9, in terms of safe workplaces. But it really just talks about the fact that you need to remember a service station forecourt is an area where there are moving vehicles and you've got hazardous goods sitting in that facility, so you need to observe a whole range of issues in that area. But I suppose the sense there is it's really a case of common sense in terms of making sure that people are staying away from the aisle areas where you've got movement of vehicles. They're standing close to the island. but also making sure that they're observing the 1.5 metre distance requirements. So even in a sense of handling an FPOS machine, if you actually have people touching that, or you're handling cash, that you're actually using sanitisers and other equipment to maintain hygiene standards as well.
What is ACAPMA doing to protect the industry?
Well, a whole range of things, I suppose. When we say protect the industry, we really do it 2 ways. So one is about protecting the reputation of the industry. So we got a hoax that was being put out in social media that suggested that people were catching COVID-19 from using petrol nozzles. It generated or emanated from the UK. And what we did very quickly is to actually run a fact check on that, and we were fortunate enough to see that there'd been some very eminent health professionals that said this was nonsense, that in the main the hydrocarbons from a fuel would kill a virus sitting on a nozzle. But they were saying that the risk is just the same as any other risk inside pushing a trolley inside a supermarket, or opening a door of a shop, or exchanging cash in a shop. And so within that circumstance, what we did very quickly was to actually make sure that we got that message out to the media, that it was actually a hoax. We also communicated that information to local and federal politicians about making sure that they were aware of where it was coming from as well. And we've been doing a lot of media. There've been a lot of allegations about petrol price gouging, because people are seeing a very big difference in prices. So we explained the reasons for that, which is the fact that some people have been buying fuel at a price 2 or 3 weeks ago that was 20 cents a litre more expensive than I buy it today. And because people haven't been buying fuel, that fuel is still in the ground. Whereas you have others that continue to turn over fuel and they're getting the cheap price. So you're getting this big variation. So we've done a lot of media explaining that process and ensuring that people were very well aware that this wasn't service stations actually gouging. So protecting the reputation is a core part of what we've been doing and will continue to do. The second part is about making sure that we protect all our people. 70,000 Australians work inside the fuel industry. And I suppose one of the things I've learnt since being there, I came from a career working with the heavy vehicle industry, where you see a lot of honest Australians that are having a crack, doing a normal job or running a business, that get unfairly maligned at times. And I suppose the sense here is to actually make sure that those staff are safe. They're safe from abuse, which is what we've started to see come up. And so we've run a little bit of press, we've run some stories around the fact that our staff do not deserve to be abused by anybody. And we've also been providing regular advice around what businesses should be doing to protect both their staff and their customers. And so in that sense, it's about creating a safe workplace, and it's about creating a reputable workplace. And that's something we have done for 42 years and will continue to do for the next 42 years.
I have more questions. Who can I ask?
So I suppose the sense here is saying ACAPMA is there for the industry. And so if there are questions that we haven't addressed here, or there are other questions that are coming up, we won't stop here. We work to basically make sure that as issues are coming up from our industry, particularly in relation to COVID-19, but just in general, that we actually go and get answers. Now, often that means that we're liaising with federal ministers or state and territory ministers or state and territory regulators. We do that as a matter of course. So the simple case is give us a call, ACAPMA, on 1800 260 270, or send us an email to ACAPMA at communications@acapma.com.au. Or just Google ACAPMA, because you'll find all the contact details there. And then just come in, send us an email, we'll endeavour to get you an answer.
Well, a big thank you, Mark. You have been there for us at UCB all hours of the day and night to help when our members need it.
Look, it's a pleasure. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here to serve our industry. We really value the relationship we have with UCB, and we value the relationship with the industry. This is a great initiative, and thanks for the opportunity.
A huge shout out to all frontline staff at servos and convenience stores around the country. There are now nearly 7,000 convenient locations around the country that are open long hours for the other heroes in the community. The supermarket staff, the Macca's kids, the doctors and the nurses who are working tirelessly. Servos are here for you when you need us. Thanks for joining us this morning. Stay safe.